Hello friends, today we are going to paint this storm on the plains, and this is all finger painted on my Frederick's canvas pad. I did not add any gesso or texture to this canvas pad, but you could if you like. Now this color I'm underpainting with is Neon Purple by Master's Touch, and the reason I didn't use Liquitex here is because they don't make a neon purple, unfortunately. Now I want you to remember that all colors and materials that I use are completely optional for you. If you don't have this color, please don't feel like you have to run out and get it. I want you to choose colors that set a mood that you really want. And you know, if purple is ultimately what you really want, I feel like deep violet, just the regular Liquitex deep violet, would work really well for an underpainting here because it will make still a nice contrast with the Diox purple that I'm going to use in a little bit. So I'm just taking my time, just spreading that purple across the canvas. Don't worry about brush stroke marks. You're not going to see any of them. Don't worry about getting a real even coverage. It's not going to matter. I'm just making sure that I cover all of the white spots because I don't want to accidentally see any little white spots poking through. But this color is going to show in my final painting. So as long as it covers the canvas in some kind of way, that's really all that matters. And then I'm just going to dry it with my hair dryer because I want it to be perfectly dry for the next part. I'm going to start finger painting. Now I did actually use a product called Gloves in a Bottle. It's a lotion that it acts like a barrier to help protect your skin from absorbing any kind of toxins, supposedly. And it doesn't wash off real well, which is good because I'm wiping my hands constantly on a wet towel while I paint like this. And right here, I am using Payne's Gray, and I'm not spreading it very thin. I'm using a really light touch so that I can get a little bit of texture there. I didn't know exactly what I wanted, but I knew I wanted a stormy sky. So I do know that I'm kind of trying to build some shadow and texture and depth for the clouds. You'll see that I am spraying the canvas a little bit, but it's really like just a little spray here and there just to make sure that the paint moves a little. Remember that the more water you use, the more likely you are to underbind your paint, which means you separate the pigment from the binder, and then the pigment can easily be wiped off later with additional layers of paint or a little bit of water or when you're varnishing. So I'm being really careful here. I really like the texture that I get from using a light touch. Your fingers create a little bit of texture and movement that it's really hard to get with a brush. And that's why I kind of went through this little finger painting phase for a while. It was so different than using a brush. And lately, I have been back to painting with brushes for the most part, but you know, you pick up little lessons, you learn little things when you push yourself outside of your comfort zone. And so even when you go back into your comfort zone, you take some of those lessons with you and you've changed the way that you paint a little bit. So for about a month and a half, almost 2 months, all I did was finger paint. And I've noticed that even that I'm back to painting with brushes now, the way I use my brush is different than it was. And, you know, I still do get my fingers in there sometimes to smear things out, but yeah, it definitely changed the way that I paint. Here I'm doing the exact same thing, but now I'm using Diox purple, and you can see the contrast between the neon purple on the underpainting and the Diox. That neon almost looks magenta. It's very, very warm. And the Diox almost looks blue It is a very, very cool purple, and the contrast between those two, I just felt it was really exciting to me. I really, really love the contrast between the two colors. But like I said, you'll get a contrast similar to that with deep violet if you don't have or can't get the neon purple. Just building this diox in the exact same way as I did the Payne's Gray, but I'm feeling a little bit freer to take it further in. I don't have to worry about it, obliterating the purple underpainting, because the diox is so transparent, and I'm not trying to spread it over every single speck of the canvas. A little bit of water there, and now I'm going to take some diox and mix it with a bit of unbleached white. And you could use regular titanium white if you like. I like the little bit of a warmer look that the unbleached gives as opposed to titanium white. And I typically, lately, I save titanium white for the very, very end, for the details. I usually don't use titanium white for anything but the details lately. And here I'm really doing the exact same thing. I'm trying not to spread it too thin. I'm not wetting it down too much. I'm using a light touch so I get an interesting texture in that color. And I'm just kind of setting it where I feel like I might want the highlights in the clouds. I'm not getting specific here. I'm not trying to, build individual cloud shapes or anything like that. I'm just figuring out where that color is going to go. And I know that at any moment, if I don't like something like that, because I don't like that, I can get rid of it. Nothing is set in stone here. A little bit more water and we'll start laying in the ground. Now this was really exciting. On the ground here, that is just burnt umber. Just plain burnt umber, and look at how like neon magenta that looks against that neon purple. That was really fun. And I was tempted to leave it like that, but I felt like it demanded too much attention from the sky. So I covered it, but you can still see hints of it in the finished painting. That's a little bit of Naples yellow, which is clearly a little too aggressive there, but painting like this, it's all about the layers. All of the layers build together to create the final image. When painting like this, never try to get your final look in your first layer. That's going to cause a lot of stress and it'll be frustrating. Let the layers build and grow and change completely. That's the exciting thing, for me anyway, painting like this, is just seeing how things change. Still just using burnt umber and Naples. A little bit more diox. Because the diox is transparent, I can layer it nicely over top of that lighter color without losing it, and it helps create more depth in those clouds, makes them a little bit more dimensional. This is very similar to glazing. So I'm just kind of glazing this color over some of that lighter color. Using a little bit more pressure now just to make sure that that diox is spread nice and thin. I did not like that where I put that lighter color there, but there's no reason to obliterate it completely. I'm just going to smear some diox over it and it starts to knock it back a little bit. So that's why I say don't worry if you don't like something, because just adding the layers is going to change it. Now I'm taking that diox and unbleached white mix, and I am starting to make a little bit more specific shapes, kind of finding where those cloud highlights are now. So I'll kind of daub it on with the finger that I picked the paint up with, and then use a cleaner finger to just kind of smear it out and find the shape. So see, I'm laying the paint down with my index finger, and then I smooth it out with my other 3 fingers. Don't be afraid to pull that light color into the dark colors. Don't keep them separate. If you keep the light colors out of the dark colors, everything is going to feel very tight and very squished. So see, like right here, I'm taking that light color into the dark color, and vice versa. Don't be afraid to take the dark color into the light color. So see, while I'm building cloud shapes, I'm still not being real specific with it. I'm letting them be a little bit abstract, a little bit implied. Mostly scattering out the bottom edge of the cloud, letting the top edge be just a little bit more solid. See how I put that light color right there in the dark? And you can always use your whole hand. Look at that, I got clear down to the wrist on that one to smear that paint out. This is what you call full contact painting. I am using a little bit more water there to really get a smoky effect with that light paint. So I will have to be careful with that later because it did underbind the paint. And so I can easily pick that color up again and move it no matter how long it dries. But I'm okay with that here because if it picks up, you know, in the next layers, it's just gonna help keep that smoky look. So I'm not terribly worried about it. I'm gonna smoke it out just a little bit more because that corner was starting to get very black. And I don't want it to be, you know, just black. So just lighten it up a bit, and then I can glaze the diox over it again and get that nice purple glow. This is a little bit of a lighter mixture. It's still just the diox and the unbleached, but there's a little bit more unbleached there because I'm going to start building the bright point in the sky. That looked like it was almost solid unbleached, but I think there was just a little bit of diox in there still. Still just building that brightness. Let's go back to the ground for a minute. I've got some Payne's Gray, and I'm really just kind of tamping down that Naples yellow. It was just a bit aggressive. The color was really pretty and I liked the composition, but it just was too much, at least too much right now. So I'm just going to kind of take it down a little bit with some Payne's Gray and, you know, continue building on it from there. I really like the dark corners, so I made the corners on the ground very, very dark. Here I took a little bit of Payne's Gray to start building some shadow shapes in the clouds, and ultimately I did not like this, and I come back and cover it up later. But I point it out to you because I want you to see that that's a pretty, you know, big oops to make, to go almost black on almost white. But I'm not worried about it here because I know that I can change anything. So if you get areas in your painting that make you go, oh, I hate that, don't stress it. Just leave it. Come back and fix it later. See how I just moved on from that? Now I'm glazing the diox over that area that I told you about. And see, it's still very dark, but we've got that purple glow coming back in. Getting a little bit more specific with those dark colors now to start building the shadows. I believe that's still just diox. Yeah, that's only the purple. And this corner I felt like needed to be very, very dark also. Still just using the diox. This is a little bit of a lighter color, more like that first mixture of the purple and unbleached that I put in the sky. I wanted to create a space where it looked like it was raining down onto the ground. So that's what I'm kind of working on here. And you'll see it go through a few different versions before I landed on the one that I like. Never settle for anything other than exactly what you want. Keep layering over it until you get it. That's just a bit of diox. Keep some shadow right above where it's raining. I challenge you to, you know, find a picture, whether it's a photograph or a painting, something. Find a picture and just take the elements that you like and put it in your painting and let the painting guide you. So what I mean is, you know, I did see a photo of a purple storm, and that's kind of what, you know, got this painting going. And that was it, a purple storm. So I didn't look at the image and try to paint what I saw. I knew I wanted a purple storm, and so I kind of ran with that. And as I saw little things happen in the painting, I chased those. So there I've got that little bit of, you know, the rain at the bottom from just streaking it down with my hand. And I was super excited about that. So I'm going to come back and play with that more in just a bit. Now I got to get rid of that little Payne's Gray splotch that I put in there. So I'm just building some shadows with the diox and the unbleached mixtures. Just creating a little piece of a cloud that's kind of shadowing the brighter area, just cutting in front of it a bit. Especially for those of you who, you know, ask me all the time, how do I get started making original paintings? It can be really intimidating and challenging to think of something, brand new, to just grab something out of your head and put it onto a canvas. That can be hard for a lot of people. So a good way to do that, I think, is, like I said, to get an image and interpret it some way. It doesn't mean copy the image, to look at an image and then make sure that your painting looks just like that image. That's not expression, Express how you feel, express what that painting makes you feel, and chase where the painting goes. If the painting suggests to you, there's a cloud right here, it doesn't matter if there's a cloud right there in the image that inspired the painting. If you feel like there's a cloud right there, then you put that cloud right there. The image that you use for inspiration may be green, but if the painting says, you know what, we really should start adding a lot of red in here, then that's what you do. That's what inspiration is. And I've almost got that cloud back the way I want it. Just pull some of that shadow down. I was a little nervous for a second with this cloud. This cloud, for some reason, went through a few phases that kind of gave me a little bit of frustration for a second. But, being patient and not letting frustration set in really is the difference between finishing a painting and not. And that's something that I've had to work at, not allowing myself to get frustrated and let my mistakes or my problems win. If you can keep yourself from getting frustrated, you can go so much farther than you would if you give in to frustration. Just back to the dioxin white mixture there to break up some of those lines that I felt like were a little too hard, and add a couple extra little poofy clouds. Putting a few highlights on the bottom edge of some clouds up there. So where I've got the brightest clouds in the middle, I feel like that's kind of where my light source is. So the clouds above it need to be highlighted on the bottom edge. And then just kind of punch in a couple of extra highlights in these more distant clouds. Just a really light touch there to suggest some highlights further on. And again, a little bit of that light color, streak it straight down with the edge of my hand. It gives that little break in the clouds and makes it look like it might be raining a bit right there. Now I got a little Payne's gray to build some of that shadow. That paint was pretty thick there, so it wasn't quite working out. Again, it was another one of those moments where I felt like that cloud was fighting me. So why I didn't just let it dry and come back to it later, I don't know. But eventually I do, and I get it. But right this moment, I'm struggling with it a little bit. So we'll go put the shadow in on this cloud. And again on this one, because it's above our light source, I'm putting the shadow on the top edge of it. Now with those shadows and highlights, we're really starting to see some individual clouds showing up. And I know not everybody digs finger painting and getting paint all over your hands, but this is something you definitely could do with a brush, you know. It's just how you think about using it, you know. You don't want to use the brush on the side and like blend back and forth, or you know, try to make very specific cloud top shapes. You want to be very loose with the brush and very scrubby. And I think that's one of the things that I took away from my time finger painting as well. You know, I do sometimes have a tendency to be a little bit too tight with a brush, and I really want to loosen that up. And I felt like after finger painting for so long, when I went back to using a brush, I absolutely had a little bit more of a looser touch to it. And that was really exciting for me. So the last few paintings that I've done after this one, which you'll see soon, I did use a brush, but I feel like I was using the brush much different than before. A little peak of light out from under that dark cloud, which is going to help create a bit of distance between the bright and the dark. It kind of pushes that dark cloud toward you. Streak it down there a little bit too. I felt like that was a bit too much, the way that it covers that other cloud, so I do get rid of a bit of that. Trying to get some of that cloud back that I covered up. And again, just some of that lighter color smeared through there so that those corners, they can stay nice and dark, but without appearing to be just dead black. Make sure it's completely dry because I'm going to glaze some of that diox over it again in a bit. But right now I want to change the highlights in my clouds a little to create kind of a pop in the light and vary the interest a bit. So I'm going to mix some of the Naples yellow with some of the unbleached, because the contrast of the purple and the yellow will really help build a glow of light in there. So I'm scattering it very loosely and pretty thin. It is heavier on the unbleached than it is on the Naples, but just adding a tiny hint of that Naples in there really warms up that color. A little bit more, a little bit heavier too. Anything that is taking light directly from that super bright spot, I'm adding a bit of that yellow too. And see how I'm almost glazing it out over the purple there. Tiny suggestion of it there. And glaze that area with just some diox. A little bit of pains there to really kick in that shadow. Kind of going back and forth between the panes and the diox here. A little bit of those purple highlights back into that area because I felt like it got a little dark. Sometimes when I'm adding these color changes like this, sometimes the color that I'm working on is dry and sometimes it's wet and blending a little bit. And really that's up to you. So, you know, while you're painting, if you think, well, I don't want it to mix with that color, then dry it. Or if you get to an area where you think, yeah, I think if it mixed with that color, it would be interesting or it would help create the transition of color that I'm looking for, then go ahead and do it when it's wet. There's no rule about you have to do it when that layer is dry or you have to do it when this layer is wet. It's whatever feels like is going to give you the look that you're going for. All right, now we're gonna grab some titanium white, and this is where I'm gonna start putting in the brightest points of the paintings. So if I'm using titanium white, you can tell I'm getting close to being done, or I feel like I am anyway. So I'm just making sure to really punch some highlights in that brightest area. Letting some of it smear out really, really thin and letting some of it be a little bit heavier and thicker. The contrast in the thin and the thick paint is going to help create a little bit of interest and a little bit more of a glow. So right there, I just put in a little bit of a thicker blob of white. And in some of those other areas, it's faded out much more thinly. Keep standing back to look at it, to decide. You know, I tell you that all the time, but I just want to make sure to drive that point home. Make big decisions about your painting at a distance. If you make a big decision with your face right in the painting, I think that you get a little bit of a myopic view and you don't really see the big picture, so to speak. So stand back and look at it, or take a photograph of it and look at the photo to make the decision. Whatever you have to do. But just make sure that you stand back all the time to really get an idea of how things are coming together. Just back into that diox and unbleached. And here I did not like what happened. That was not good at all. But it's not a big deal. First of all, the angle was not what I wanted. Second of all, it was kind of curved, which, you know, wouldn't really happen. So I mess with it for a minute before I decide, nope, that's just not right. And then I get rid of it. So when in doubt, when you really hate something, spray it out. So that's what I'm about to do. Flap my hand at it because I was getting frustrated with it. So I just sprayed it with a little extra water and put some diox right over it. And now it's gone. Don't have to sweat it. Little extra water. And bye-bye. See, you can fix anything. It's just about knowing that you can fix anything. That's the important thing. You know, if you make a mistake, like I just did, and you don't know how to fix it, and so you don't try, then you won't learn how to fix it. You know, we learn how to fix those things by making the mistakes in the first place and then by attempting to fix it. There, I'm doing the exact same thing. I just streaked a bit of the diox in, which creates a nice kind of shadow in the rainstorm. You know, it's not enough to just have streaks of a light color. You put a little bit of streaks of some darker color in there, and it gives it a bit more dimension and impact. A little bit of a lighter color there right next to the darker color. I really like the way that rain looks now with the light and the dark. Here I'm going to mix up a little bit of a green color using my Naples, the burnt umber, and some indanthrene. And I'm going to start spreading that through the ground. I'm using very little water, and I'm putting some good pressure on that paint to really get it to streak. That way the ground has a little bit more substance to it. I don't want the ground to be real faded because it will, look too similar to the sky. So if it's very streaky, then it's going to look a little bit flatter, a little bit more like the ground. Just kind of going back and forth between that green, the Naples, and a little bit of burnt umber. Now the important thing here is I'm not cutting off the very bottom of those rain streaks. I'm letting those come down into the ground. If I cut the horizon directly over the edge of those rain streaks, it's going to push them way into the distance. It's going to disconnect them from the ground, and I feel like the ground and the sky will seem like they're in different paintings. But if I let those rain streaks overlap the horizon, like it does there, then it feels like the rain is coming down onto the ground. Those two sections, the sky and the ground, they exist in the same place. They're part of the same painting. It connects them a little bit. So don't just cut those off straight at the horizon. I'm using quite a bit more paint, less water, and just, like I said, smearing it on, leaving some texture. A little bit of the Payne's gray again for the sides, because I like to create kind of a vignette, and blurring out where the sky and the ground meet in the corners. To me, it kind of pushes you into the middle of the painting so that you look at, the interesting things, and I just feel like it helps kind of contain the painting a little bit more. I know I told you not to cut off the rain bits with the horizon, and then I went ahead and did it, but it won't be like that when we're done, I promise. But I just had to get some of that color in there. But see how flat that looks now that I've cut off the bottom of the rainstorm? It doesn't seem like it's raining right there in the interesting part of the ground. And it makes that rainstorm a little less impactful. I actually recorded this a couple weeks ago, so as I'm going along and telling you not to do things, and then I go, oh wait, I did that though. So, because I don't remember exactly what I did until I see that I did it, but I know I bring that back. Just still building the texture and the colors of the ground before I worry about that. I think the streakiness of the light on the ground, it feels very windswept to me, like maybe it's a field of long dry grass, and it's been, blown around by high winds, and so it's kind of laying down in all directions. That's what that feels like to me. Just going to add a little punch of that unbleached in there. All of that paint is still wet, so they're streaking together nicely. But that also means that, I could run the risk of over blending things. So I have to be very careful, to smear something and then leave it alone. Here I'm just kind of wetting down my finger just a little bit on my damp towel and blurring out that line in the back. I don't want to have a hard horizon line there because it'll make this part harder. So now I'm taking some of that purple and smearing it down over top of the horizon again. All that green and everything is still wet, so I end up getting some in there, but you know, a damp towel and a streak in the right direction and it's gone. I could have just waited until it was dry, but I didn't. All right, I'm using my short liner and just some white, and I'm going to create some lightning. Now notice how I'm holding my brush and I'm letting my hand shake. I'm intentionally making my hand shake a little bit so that I get a nice jaggedy lightning strike. I don't want, an unnatural looking zigzag, so I'm not gonna, try to intentionally draw zigzaggy lines. I'm just gonna kind of shake my hand a little bit and let it translate to the paint the way that it does. I'm starting in that brightest area and just connecting it to points that I feel like it might go into clouds or behind clouds. Sometimes I take it over top of clouds, but it's all very planned. And super light pressure to get some just very, very thin little bits of lines. And sometimes the line breaks and disappears and then shows back up. And that's okay because, lightning would kind of do that. Remember that if you're getting very fat lines, just check the pressure that you're putting on your brush, because this is a very small, thin brush. But if I put heavy pressure on it, I'm gonna get a much fatter line than I want. My brush is barely touching the canvas, almost not at all, and that's how I'm getting some of these lines that are a hair thin, just very, very razor thin. And I have my hand planted on my canvas, which helps me control the pressure. We'll make some that kind of come out from behind these little bits of clouds. I am widening the lightning right where it starts. So put a little bit more pressure on it there, and then reduce pressure as we get out to the end to get those little spidery thin little bits of lightning at the end. Now I'm going to take some of that white and I'm going to mix it with some matte medium. And that's to get a more transparent color, because lightning sometimes has little, little tendrily bits that are maybe a little bit more see-through. Maybe they're more distant or a little bit more hidden in the atmosphere, whatever it is. So I'm just going to add a few that as it dries, they really end up kind of fading into the canvas a bit, but you still see them, just not as intensely. And I think that that gives the lightning a little bit more realism, a little bit more dimension and interest. Don't be afraid to go crazy with the lightning. There's no such thing as too much lightning. Just brightening up that central area there with a bit more white, just to make sure that it's nice and bright in there where the lightning is starting. I'm going to go to my 5/8 inch filbert here and just glaze the ground a little bit. So I'm going to get some Payne's Gray. I've got a little extra water on my brush, a little bit of the burnt umber, and some matte medium. Just a very transparent color. Again, just that Naples is a little aggressive. I like that there, but just not how aggressively bright it was. So I'm just kind of pressing it back down into the ground a little bit. And a tiny bit of the Naples, because I still want to have some of the pure Naples, just not as much as I had. A little bit more Payne's in the corner, again for that vignette look. Letting it be very textured, because maybe that'll suggest some kind of blowing plants or whatever. There we go. That's what I was looking for in the ground. I feel like that Naples is perfect now. It's there, but it's not in your face. So I'm gonna sign it. So thank you everyone for watching and for painting along. Feel free to share and tag me on Instagram. That's the best way for me to see your paintings. You can find me by searching Painting with Jane. And I look forward to seeing what you come up with this painting. So I will see you guys again in the next video.